Hey everybody, today we're going to take a look at aggregation errors, and they're the most common errors for both beginners and very experienced users. We're going to use this very simple text table made from Superstore data. The Superstore data set contains 10,000 records. Now, I haven't applied any filters to this data, but we're only looking at three aggregated records. Now, if I come up here and take a look at the Analysis tab, under View Data, we can view the data in the data table for this particular worksheet. And if I take a look at the total data under here, under Orders, it totals 10,000 records, 10,000 rows of data. We haven't applied any filters, so it's all the rows in the Superstore data set. But if I take a look at the summary data, that's the data that you see on the screen here, there are three records. And what's happened is these 10,000 records have been aggregated up to three total rows of data. All right, office supplies, furniture, and technology. So now when I want to calculate an average selling price, it's a very simple calculation. All we do is we take the sales and divide by quantity. So if I take the sum of sales and go to divide it by quantity, I get this aggregation error. It says, hey, wait a minute. You can't do this because one of these values, the sum of sales, is aggregated to those three values. And the other, the quantity, is not aggregated. It's at the 10,000 record level. So to clear the error, all we have to do is aggregate quantity to the same level. So we've got three records in quantity, and now the formula is valid. And we can apply that formula, and we can see that we get the average selling price for furniture is $90, and for technology is $120, and so on. Well, let's take a look at other places that this aggregation error pops up. We can take a look at this expression where I've used an LOD expression to calculate the max order date. And all this says is for each category, I'd like to see the max order date. And then I've got an expression here that I use to calculate the sales at the max to order date. And this just says if the date equals that max date for each one of the subcategories, then record the sales. So I've got the sales for each one of those each one of those subcategories. But now I want to come back and I want to calculate a ratio of those two values. And I can start here by taking my LOD expression and dividing it by the sum of sales. That's this column right here. I want to take that column and divide it by that column. And right away, I get this aggregation error. And that's because the LOD expression in itself is not an aggregate. It represents an aggregation of values, but the expression itself is not an aggregate in itself. And we have to aggregate that expression to the same level as the sum of sales. We're back to, now this is 17 records. So I've got the sum of sales, and sure enough, now we can use that. And when we apply that, we can see that we get this value divided by that value, or 3%, 6%, or so on. Well, let's see what happens when we use a table calculation. Table calculations are determined last in the order of operation. And this would be a typical table calculation. All we're doing here is we're taking a look at the percent of total, the sum of profit divided by the total sum of profit. And that's a typical table calculation. And it would return these values here. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to multiply that percent of profit times sales so that I can find the dollar profit. And when I go to do that, sure enough, I get that same type of error message that we've seen before. This is our aggregation error. It's going to come back and it's going to tell us that we've got an aggregation error. We're trying to mix aggregates and non-aggregates. Well, table calculations, by their nature, are always an aggregate. So this value, the percent of total, is an aggregate. So sales has to be aggregated to the same level. The sum of sales, we apply that value. And now we can get the values that we're looking for. We can get this value times that value as aggregates. And you can see this is an aggregation at this point. I got one more that I want to show you, and that involves aggregating dimensions. We've just got the sum of sales by category, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to get the sum or the average per customer. And to do that, it should be a very simple calculation. All I have to do is sum the sales and divide it by the customers. Well, the customers are text, they're names. And we can't just aggregate. We can't put sum of customer. That doesn't make any sense at all. We can count customers, and we can count them in one of two ways. We can count them distinctly, or we can count them each time a customer name appears. Well, here we want to use the distinct count, and so I would count those distinctly. Count D, customer name, and now our expression is valid. We can apply that expression, and sales per customer then come out to a value that looks like this. Well, today I wanted to share with you very simple aggregation problems and how to clear those aggregation problems. You're going to run into these every day, and as I do, I make mistakes just like anybody else. And clearing the aggregation error is a very simple thing to do. Just look for the part that is aggregated and the dimension or measure that is not aggregated, and then aggregate the dimension as needed. Thank you very much. Bye now.